For many years now, Russ and Craig have had many wide-ranging conversations with folks from all over the gaming world. This is one of those conversations.
D6G, the Lost Chapter.
So I told him, I don't care what they say in Italy. Venti doesn't mean... Oh, hey, Russ. Look,
Yes.
It's Ross.
Hey, Ross Watson.
Ross
Hi, guys.
Watson.
Here-
Ross, how you doing? Have you recovered from Gen Con yet?
I have, and it's nice and cool in this particular Dunkin' Donuts, so I'm glad about
It
that.
is nice and cool.
This particular ephemeral,
Right.
metaphysical Dunkin' Donuts
So, Ross,
is indeed quite cool.
What are you enjoying today there, sir? What kind of donut is what's your favorite donut at Dunkin' Donuts?
I have an eclair here.
Ooh, an eclair. I'm not sure.
Interesting
That's
choice.
interesting. I'm not sure most dunks have
I don't know how you
eclairs.
found that on the rack, but that's quite impressive.
Impressive.
Well, it's possible I got it mixed up with a bear claw.
Oh, they don't have those either. This is interesting. So
There you go.
Either way, I think it's gutsy.
it is gutsy.
It's a gutsy choice.
It's a bold move.
Yeah. Russ, how about yourself?
I'm enjoying the summer tea. I like the tea with just lemon, no sugar.
Interesting.
So I'm not from the South. I know in the South they would tell you that if it's not sweetened tea, it's not sweet. It's not tea. But up here in New England, we like our tea with no sugar. At least I do.
Yeah, no, we don't. Yeah,
I do.
I
like-
spent too much time, but below the Mason-Dixon
Yes.
line, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so.
I can't take my tea without piles of sugar.
Ross, so you've been a couple different places. Tea with sugar or without?
I go with.
Okay.
See,
You're both crazy.
Refined gentlemen of literary pursuits.
All right.
Choose with.
Well, can we all agree on the lemon at least? You got to have lemon in tea.
Yeah,
Depends on the
that's good.
tea.
All right.
Depends on the
Ooh,
tea.
Wow.
Darjeeling with lemon indeed.
Earl Grey.
Earl Grey.
Hot with sugar.
Hardly a choice at all.
Right. All right. So, see what we were all doing there, guys? We were all right there role playing.
We were role playing.
And I thought it would be, why don't we talk about this? So since all three of us have GM'd once or twice, some of us more than others.
Once or twice.
I'm having a blast, Ross, and I have you to thank for this.
Oh, yeah?
So prior to the Gen Con where we played Death Watch with you, I had only played a RPG at a con one other time, and it was back in college. And actually had a great time. It was Paranoia. It was awesome.
Ooh, Paranoia.
It was such a fun game. But since then, it was college, and those are the crazy college days, right? So I'm out of college, and I played RPGs continually, but I always played them with my close-knit group of friends, in a long-range campaign. And I didn't get back into the idea of one-offs, particularly one-offs with people you don't know, like at a con, until we played Death Watch. And now it's become a thing where it's just been so much fun. Every Gen Con since then, I participated in some form of one-off RPG session. Always without fail, I've had a great time. Almost always with people, not everybody I know there. So there's always some person I'd never met before or only very, very lightly acquainted with. So it's been a lot of fun to do that. And I thought it'd be kind of cool to talk about here some of the challenges and how you prepare and how does one be ready both as a GM or as a player and what the appeal of one-off campaigns are, especially in an event like a convention.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a totally different animal than playing at home with the same group you play with all the time. And I'm really glad to hear that you've gone out and experimented like that and played with new people and played with new games like that at cons. Because that's really one of the best things you can do at a con, really, is go try out a new game, sit down with people you never played before. And there's almost always something you walk away from that table going, oh, wow, that was really cool, right?
And one of my favorite things about it is, I got a chance when the Iron Kingdoms RPG first came out a few years ago. I signed up to try one of the sessions with Privateer Press. And little did I know, and I'm forgetting the gentleman's name now, the GM for our game was the designer. So it was really cool because not only did I want to buy it anyway, but it was cool to play with him. But also what's been interesting for me, Ross, is to really see, even if it's a game, let's say I didn't want to buy into Iron Kingdoms, I happen to, but let's say I didn't. But even if you don't, even if it's an RPG that you only participate in those mechanics once, you always get a different style of GM. And you meet someone, and their style is always a little different, but I always find things that are really, so far I've been lucky, I guess. I've always had great GMs, and there's always something I like. I look at it and go, wow, that was a really neat way, the way he handled that particular situation. I got to remember that for when I GM my next game.
Yeah, I usually find something that I learn about, like maybe a new technique of how to run a game or a new way to bring across an interesting character, things of that nature. So that's one of the reasons why I love playing con games, and I run con games quite a bit, actually. Here in Colorado, we have some fantastic game cons, and I'm actually running a game this weekend at Myths and Legends Con, and then in a couple of weeks, I'm doing Tacticon here, and I'm running my D&D 5th edition game there, where you all play the characters from the Dungeons & Dragons cartoon.
Oh, cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I want to ask
So
you
that's
this.
an excellent launching point.
Yeah.
So it's a one-off with players that you theoretically haven't played with before.
Right.
And what you've chosen is a story and a framework that many, if not most, D&D players would be familiar with. So you've got characters built in. Would you suggest that as sort of a stepping stone into the discussion about a one-off, that coming into it with characters that may sort of archetypes maybe, or at least something that's relatively familiar and already pre-generated is a good idea?
I think so. And here's the thing, is that making your own character can be really great. It can be a great experience, but it takes a lot of time. Depending on the system. I mean, some systems you can make characters very quickly, like Feng Shui. You can sit down and be playing in 5 minutes. But most of the time, making characters takes up some time. And part of the thing about games that are one-offs, most of the time you're doing these, you have a limited amount of time to do it. Usually between 4 and 6 hours. Most of the time when I run a game at a convention, for example, I have a 4-hour slot. So if I'm going to spend 4 hours with a bunch of people and I want them to have a great time, it seems to me that making characters at the table is a bad idea. I would rather have them grab a character sheet and get into the action and start having fun right away, rather than, take up a lot of that time making, sometimes laboriously making a character. Especially, it depends on how many people you have at your table too. Like if I have a full table of players at a one-off, that can be up to 6 or 7 people, right? And if each of those people takes, 10 to 15 minutes to make a character, which is not unreasonable, but that's still taking up 10 to 15 minutes of my time as well, that's, over an hour.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, I definitely think that making pre-gens is a really good way to go. Now, here's my particular style on that, too. When I create the story of the one-off, I like to build it around the characters. I like to make it a showcase for the characters to do awesome things, right? So, like in my cartoon game, I find opportunities for Eric to try and talk the group out of a situation, or try to find ways so that Sheila can turn invisible and go do a thing. Right, and I can do that because the pre-gens exist already, and I know ahead of time what their things are, what their what they care about.
So you can ensure there's like a magic moment for each player at some point.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
That's awesome, and I agree with you. I think I'm trying to think of one where I didn't. Almost all of them, I've played a pre-gen character. Some of them I've had the luxury of knowing what it was before I went. So either the GM, I knew the GM beforehand, or he or she sent them out to us, or but sometimes, so like, we played, the past couple Gen Cons, we played the Firefly RPG where we were the actual characters from the show.
Ooh, fun.
So that was fun. And knowing that, I got to play Jane, and knowing going in there, the characters kind of solved the problem Craig was referencing, which is we all know you sit down at the table with a style to play. Now, some folks might find that constraining. I thought it was kind of interesting. And then this past Gen Con, same GM, he took the Firefly Cortex rules and made a hybrid customized version. Yeah, and leverage rules, and he turned it into Guardians of the Galaxy.
Ooh, fun.
And I got Groot, which was a particularly challenging character to play because you only have one line.
Or would have been if you hadn't constantly cheated.
So, but what was interesting about that both times was I knew the characters, but then I'm also thinking back to when we played your Deathwatch game, or when I played the Iron Kingdoms. And in those games, the characters were pre-gens, and I didn't really, it wasn't like a famous Marine. It was just, a Marine I was playing.
Well, it was your
that was
guy.
You're right. No, that was the Deathwatch. You're right. No, Deathwatch was a specific guy. And then, but then in the Iron Kingdoms one, it wasn't. It was just a generic dude from the Iron Kingdoms. And those were interesting too, because I looked at it and I tried, you have 10 minutes to kind of figure out how you're going to play this guy. And it's kind of an interesting challenge, especially if you've never seen the character before until you sit down, right?
And you put your own spin on it. I find that to be a fun challenge for a role player.
Right.
For a guy like me who likes to be creative, I like to put a little fun little twist on it.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked about all this about pre-gen characters and all that, but I think one of the things that's really important to mention here is that when you go do a one-off game, especially as a player, sometimes you're not really interested in what the characters are, what the system is. Sometimes you want to try something completely new and completely different. Mm-hmm. And there's some really cool games out there on the indie side of the RPG that I think don't require pre-gens. In fact, are better off not having them. And I think you guys should try out those games as well. And I'm talking about games like On Mighty Thews, where you make a bunch of barbarians and creating characters is actually part of building the world. Or Fiasco, which is this fantastic game that I got to play at ChupacabraCon in Austin, Texas. Mm-hmm. And it's a Coen Brothers movie in an RPG format. There's no DM. It's shared narrative control throughout the entire group. So making the characters is as simple as sort of defining yourself by one or two little things.
Yep.
So when I say pre-gens, that's true most of the time when you're talking about traditional games. That's the only thing I wanted to get out there.
Yeah, no,
traditional RPGs.
It's true because we did a crazy thing once. One of our old play-by-mobs, we did the Dresden Files RPG. Very
yeah.
But the premise of the Dresden Files RPG, which is interesting, is the world is created by the players and the GM cooperatively. So
correct.
You all sit at the table and someone's like, where should we play? Boston. Okay, fine. What's a big thing happening in Boston? There's vampires in Boston. Okay, vampires is the main problem. What are they trying to do? You know, they need to blow up the Prue building. Okay, they got to blow up the Prue building. Why are they blowing up the Prue building? And then so it's like you get this whole thing and you all of a sudden figure it out and you're really playing by the seat of your pants. What's neat about it is it's collaborative, but it also reduces a lot of the pressure. I mean, it's harder for the GM in a way because he's got nothing really seriously prepped. But on the other side of it, it's a lot. It takes the pressure off because he knows everybody doesn't expect huge amounts of prepping. It's all collaborative storytelling, which is really neat.
And it's about player engagement, which is also really
very, very cool.
So let's talk about some other aspects though of your game when you're doing a one-off.
Well, let me ask you this real quick because I think this might be the biggest question people might have if they're going to try to GM one of these.
Okay.
And I think the toughest challenge I think for any GM, at least for me, always as a GM, whether I'm playing a campaign game or a one-off game is, let's say I'm going to prep and I want to have a really tight story and I'm doing my normal prep as a GM and it's more of a traditional type of role-playing game. You're always questioning yourself, do I have enough material for the time period? And how do I, now with a campaign game, you usually err on the side of over-preparing and then the characters get as far as they get and you've got extra material, great, you have less work to do next time, right? But on a one-off, you really it's a little more challenging, right? Because you've got that 3-hour, 4-hour, whatever the time block is, and you're trying to build a compelling story with a beginning, middle, and end that fits in 3 hours. And how do you go about doing that, Ross?
Well, one thing I always try to keep in mind is, what am I trying to do here, right? If I'm running a game and my goal is just to have everybody have a good time, pacing is part of that, but it's not the end all be all. And as long as everybody had a good time and walked away from the table, I feel like I'm successful in that, right?
Right.
And most people, I think that's their main goal is to present an entertaining, we all had a good time, a memorable, compelling game. So the thing about the time limit, it's something to keep in mind. I use it as a tool. Like I use it as a way to sort of gauge where I need to start that big final battle to end on a high note. And so usually what I do is I have a small skirmish somewhere in the first hour. Okay. And the reason why I do that is because a small skirmish right at the beginning of the game is a good way to get everybody thinking about their character and how the mechanics work. And if you have somebody sit down that hasn't played before, it's a really good time to explain the basics. Okay.
Right.
So you do quick skirmish sometime in the first hour. Then you have like the rising action portion. It's almost like a movie. The rising action portion should probably be your second hour. And maybe into the third, depending on how the role playing is going. And by the time you get to that third hour, you should starting to build up the climax, because if you have a 4-hour game, you want to hit that climax. You want to start that battle no later than say 15 minutes in that last hour, because you want a good 45 minute to an hour big brawl to finish it up. I have never failed to have a good response from this as a player or a GM. If you do a really awesome climactic encounter for that last hour of the game, everybody's going to have a good time. So pacing is important. It's just one way to look at your available time and kind of just keep your phone or your watch handy and just every so often check to see where you are. Don't be afraid as GM too in a one-off, because it's not a campaign. You can kind of jump in there and say, okay, guys, and now you're going to move on to the next part. Like in a campaign game, I would never want to interrupt someone if they're on a roll or if all the characters are enjoying themselves. If everybody's having great table talk, that's one thing. But in a one shot, I would probably take a little more control. I would say, okay, guys, we need to move on. We got more stuff done, and the game ends at whenever 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. So yeah, I take a little more control, and I help things move along as a GM. I kind of try to break the log jams.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Cool. So, and what kind of prep work do you do? Do you think how important is it for you to understand or know the experience levels of the players that are going to be at the table with you? Does that change the kind of setting you're going to run or the kind of game you're going to run?
Well, there's games that are oriented towards beginners, and a lot of times if you set up yourself a lot of this we've been doing through the lens of doing a one shot at a convention. Mm-hmm. Okay, and usually when you do that at a convention, you sign up, and as part of your sign up, you include the information about what the game is like, what system it is for, how many players, that kind of a thing. And usually there's a section where you can talk about whether it is for beginners or whether it's for experienced players. I always assume that there's going to be at least one or two guys who've never played before when I do a one shot. So I always try to include, some time to bring them up to speed, and I try not to overcomplicate the mechanics. For example, when we played our Deathwatch game, we didn't really get into the whole squad mode stuff because that is a layer of mechanics that takes a little extra time. Right, and I wanted to focus on everybody enjoying themselves and being Space Marines, so that was something I left out. And like if we were playing a game of, say, D&D 5th edition, right, there's a lot of stuff that I would leave in, but I would probably keep the levels on the low end. Right. Because once you get to, say, 12th or 13th level as a spellcaster in D&D 5th, your spell list can get really, really long, and there's the case of analysis paralysis. There's a potential issue there, right, for a new player. Can you imagine a new player sitting down and has 15 spells? What do I cast in this situation? Right. So if you keep the levels low, right, the experience levels of the characters low, and you keep the amount of decisions that they have to make to a reasonable level, even a new player can jump in, and they're not going to be intimidated, and B, they're not going to spend forever taking their turn. So it's going to keep things moving along. Right.
Very cool. So what about as a player? Like, so if I'm going in as a player.
Yeah.
How should I prepare? And is there anything I need to worry about? Should I show up myself and a pencil and some dice, or?
Well, that's really, in terms of preparation, in terms of like physical preparation. Yeah. I think that's pretty much all I would ever expect anyone to do is show up and maybe pencil and dice. The thing about being a player at a one shot, though, and I think this is really important. This kind of goes back to the whole idea of gaming as a social event, right? We're all sitting down and we're sharing this awesome story and we're rolling dice to see what happens. But it is cooperative. We're all working together. And as a player, if you're coming to a one shot, I think one of the things you can do is you can help other people if they're struggling, if they haven't known the system, right? And you do. It's something great for you to be able to do, to lean over and say, okay, man, you just need a D6 and a D8 here. And one of those is your wild die, and you pick the best, like if we're playing Savage Worlds. Or you look for ways to bring out the coolness of another person's character. Like if you're sitting next to a guy and he happens to be playing, the son of a god on Olympus, and he hasn't done anything like that, all game, and you're in the climax. One thing you could do to be a good player is be like, hey man, aren't you the son of Zeus? Do some of that lightning stuff, man. Yep. Bring it on.
I have a good example of that. So I was really proud of Dean, the gentleman who ran our game with the Guardians of the Galaxy. He invited my daughters to play as well. So my daughter Rose and Kit played, and she's 12 or now 13, but she was 12 at the time, and Kit's 11, and it's their first time playing a role-playing game outside the home, right? Outside their comfort zone. And here they are at a table with all adults, and Craig's there, which is great, and Nicole's playing with us, that's good, but then also Bob Oswald, the listener of the show, is playing with us, and then Dean, and so I'm there, and you could tell Rose is a little nervous, and she's playing Rocket, right? So Rocket's the idea guy, right? So he's and she loves Rocket, it's her favorite character, but she's a little intimidated. You can tell in the beginning she's a little and I thought I was really impressed by the other players who all kind of helped her in subtle ways and weren't saying like, come on, figure it out. It was more like, hey, as Rocket, did you have this plan earlier? And did you think, and they kind of just suggested to her, and she got, and by the end she was kind of getting it, and it took her a little bit to lose maybe her bashfulness, but it was great to see the table come together and kind of help out the kids, which really was a great moment. So it's a great way to also get your kids kind of a little more, and yourself as a person a little more outgoing, right? Kind of break those barriers, meet new people.
Do you need that guy's leg? for your plan, Rocket.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So this is exactly one of the things you can do at a one shot is be a good player.
Yep.
Right. And find ways to help other people contribute and be creative and be fun with the characters.
And help the GM too. Like, especially if a lot of GMs like to try new stuff at one-offs.
Yes.
Like Dean was trying a whole new, hybrid system he was building. And so as a player, you got to kind of understand that the GMs there, a lot of times they're very experienced, but sometimes they might be nervous and you want to make sure they're having a good time too. So, make sure you kind of go along with the GM, look where they're heading, and maybe try to help them out a little bit to make it a much more collaborative story. Don't be that guy that's like, actually, the rule should be, don't do that.
Yeah. Please don't do that.
Why don't you? What happens if you're the game master, Ross, and you get one of those? Because they're out there. Well, we've seen them.
That's true. And actually, I have a great story to tell about this because this happened to me. I was running a game of Accursed at Genghis Khan here in Aurora, Colorado, and I had a guy who was being a very loud player, kind of talking over everybody and really is not improving the game for anyone. And thinking about this situation, the right thing to do is to not let that happen, not just sit back and let that impact the game. Because for the most part, these people have given up 4 hours of their time to come and play your game with you. As a GM, you kind of have to take some responsibility for the social environment of your game, right? And in cases where it's like a convention, they've probably paid money to be there too, right? And so they've sometimes traveled great distances. Like if you go to Gen Con, you meet guys from Germany and Australia, okay?
Right.
And they didn't fly over here to sit and listen to somebody, yak for 4 hours who isn't the GM and basically disrupt everything. So if I have a disruptive player at a one shot, I think the best thing to do is to ask that guy outside for a second. Don't try and fix it at the table because you're just going to make everybody feel uncomfortable. But if you say, hey man, can I talk to you for a minute out on the hallway, right? Mm-hmm. You take the disruptive player out there for a second and you explain to him. You say, hey man, listen, these people, paid some money. They gave up 4 hours of their time. I need you to work with me and bring it down a little bit, or whatever the behavior is that's unacceptable, right? You try to work it out and get them on your side, right? And if that doesn't work, okay, yeah, you got to kind of man up, unfortunately, and just eject the guy from the group. I think because in this situation, again, you only have 4 hours with these people. You want to make it as memorable and engaging and fun in the right way, memorable in the right way, I should say, right? You don't want to be the GM that just sits back and lets somebody ruin everybody else's fun. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you guys think? Do you think I'm right or wrong on that one?
I agree. I think it's very awkward, but I think also players should back the GM up, right? So if you've got a guy who's being disruptive and the GM's trying to correct it, I think the peer pressure of the group kind of coming to the person saying, "Yeah, man, you're bringing this whole thing down. Let's just play the game as the GM's running it, and it is what it is. Let's have fun." Is helpful because otherwise, that you don't want to just let the GM solve the problem because I think the peer pressure solves it more quickly. So,
well, there's lots of different ways to handle it. I mean, I just threw out the one that I would like to do the most.
Yeah,
but yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Here's the thing too: is that one thing I always try to remember. Okay, like just so you guys know, as a game designer, it's like being a doctor in a hospital and being a patient sometimes, right? And you're like, wait a second, that's not how that rule's supposed to work, right? Because I'm a game designer. Doctors make the worst patients. Sometimes game designers make the worst players. But I always try to remember, and this is something that's important for I think anybody who's a player. The guy running the game, he's the one in charge, even if the rules say something totally different.
Right?
That's one thing. He gets to make that judgment call. Because he's the GM. So. Maybe there's a reason. There should be a good reason behind it, right?
Yep.
But you don't need to be the inquisitor in this situation. You don't need to be the keeper of the main rule book. Just sit back, relax, and if there's an issue and you really think it shouldn't work that way, talk to him about it after the game.
Right.
Don't waste our time of what little we have, flipping through the book trying to find this reference. Just let the guy make a ruling and move on.
And that's one of the reasons. Actually, I don't generally play the classic RPGs at cons. So I don't actually go out and play Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition or 4th edition at a con. Because I'm afraid, honestly, and maybe it's a character flaw of mine, but I'm afraid there's people know these systems so well that you're going to get that guy. What I actually like to play games that I'm either with the designer on, like you with Death Watch, so there's not going to be arguments there, or more often with a game that's either being released are brand new, so everybody there is learning with you. So and usually when people are learning games, they're much more engaged and they just want to see if it's fun.
Sure.
Once in a while, you still get that guy who's like, wants to know every little nook and cranny and won't let the GM sort of accelerate the scene, and that's always a little tricky. But generally, you get people who are much more inquisitive and not min-maxers. And then the second part I like is GMs that are running their own one-offs or their own wacky rule systems, because going into that,
right.
There's no real rule. I mean, there's some set of rules the GM's using, but there's no real rules. It's just some fun, crazy idea this guy's got or he's trying to build. And that's a lot of fun because no one at the table is that guy. They're all just like, I'm going to try this crazy thing.
And let's not scare people away. Like one-shots are a great way to learn a new system.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with asking questions when you're learning a new system. If I was to show up and play Paranoia, which I haven't in years, right?
Yeah.
But I would love to play it again.
Me too.
If I showed up
at
a one-shot run by Russ, who's the computer, and he's running Paranoia, and I want to learn the system all over again, I would probably ask a few questions to be like, okay, so how does this, I need to roll what now?
Right.
And I'm doing this why? And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, that's not bad at all. Right. That's the good stuff. Especially
because some one-offs are entirely designed as entry points.
Right.
Entirely designed as beginner games. So nobody should be scared of asking questions or clarifying rules or things of that nature.
And
we're just talking about earlier. We were just talking about people who are disruptive about it.
And we're talking about,
and that's very vanishingly rare.
It is. I was going to say,
unless,
Craig,
like Russ says, you're going to do one of these hardcore, advanced Dungeons and Dragons, not advanced Dungeons and Dragons AD&D, but Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, more advanced con story kind of thing.
Well, and I should say too, it's an educate. I mean, like I said, I've passed now 4 Gen Cons, or 5 now. I can't remember now. I've played in these one-offs, and I have yet to have a bad player or GM experience. Everybody's been great. Some of them were totally people I didn't even know. I just signed up randomly. All the players were fully engaged. It was exactly what you'd hope. Everyone I met was a real nice person. I talked to them afterwards, had a great time. And I feel, I really think you should not be scared to do this. In fact, you should look at it as an opportunity to meet new people and experience new things. You'll learn other ways people play, and you'll get ideas for your next character, and people will do crazy things, even in game systems well, and be like, wow, that's a really interesting way to play a character. Or you'll see a GM do something really cool and an interesting way to tell a story. I will never forget the way Dean ended that Guardians of the Galaxy. That might be one of the coolest climaxes I've ever seen. And so
I met this one guy who was playing in our game of Widening Gyre, which my friend Bill Keys does. It's a Victorian England steampunk game, and this guy was playing a sergeant of the Royal Army. Okay,
yeah.
And I had never thought of this in the way he was playing this guy, and this was kind of really opened my eyes. But he suddenly transformed this dude into a mutton chop wearing action star who jumps off the top of the blimp shouting, "Rule Britannia, you creepers!" and just smashes right into the whole bunch of them. And I'm like, yes, that right there, I will use that later on with another character, but yes.
Exactly. So don't be afraid to learn this stuff and try something new and try new RPGs too. It's a great way to learn an RPG.
Yeah. If I can throw out a couple more really quick
please do.
Tips. So again, what I was saying earlier about getting people into the action really fast, right? Mm-hmm. I have seen some games where that gets kind of blown out of the water by the GM trying to give us too much information. So my recommendations, the tips I would give is keep your intro to the setting and the story short and sweet. Mm-hmm. Keep your intro to the character short and sweet. All I really need to know about Jack Sparr is that she is a tomboy in Victorian London. She is not a lady, and she is interested in machines. Right? Those are her main things. That's all I really need to know. I don't need 2 pages of backstory that explains how she ended up, in prison for a crime she didn't commit. Because by the time I finish reading that, we're already 15 to 20 minutes into the game, and I didn't need to know that, right? And the GM, as a GM, I don't need to hear you tell me 10 minutes worth of exposition on why the Lich Lord, has imprisoned the last Paladins of Light. Right. Just tell us you need to go rescue the Paladins of Light, and we'll explore that story along the way. Mm-hmm. What I'm getting at is the only time I would expect to see an intro describing what the hell's going on is during a Star Wars game where that's part of the opening crawl.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Most of the time, I would just say, okay, your agent's working for the Queen in Victorian London. Go. Here's your character sheet.
Yep.
And the Chinese are planning to blow up Trafalgar Square with a clockwork dragon.
Right.
Okay, that's bad, right? We need to stop that. Okay, good.
Right.
See what I'm saying? There's a
sound
huge
bad.
difference.
It does sound bad, and I also want to deal with it. Ross, roll me a character.
So it's a big difference between those two things. That's
Yep.
all I'm saying is that get them into the action quickly. Don't mess around with huge blocks of text or huge, chunks of exposition, because
Right.
I see that as a common mistake a lot of GMs try to make.
Well, and I liked your recommendation, Ross, of doing the expedition with role playing itself. So you have
we'll learn along the way.
scene which it teaches you as you go, which is great. And you'd be surprised how fast everybody gets vested with just a few quick scenes.
Exactly.
As opposed to reading a story, people are going to tune out. They're going to get bored.
My favorite opening of a one-shot ever was a feng shui game. And the way the guy did it was he said, okay, you guys have all seen movies, right? We all nod our heads. He goes, okay. So the Paramount logo fades into a mountain. And then we see a plane flying over the mountain, and then the camera goes into the plane, and you are all chained up inside the plane, and you don't know why. And the pilot just jumped out with a parachute on his back, the only parachute. I'm like, awesome! This is the best opening ever.
Nice.
Talk about being put right into the action. I was like, brilliant.
That is awesome. That's awesome. Well, Craig, got anything else for this? I think this is fantastic.
No, I'm just looking forward to next Gen Con now.
Yeah, see, you got to dial these things up. So,
Well,
Ross,
you guys are doing TempleCon, isn't that right?
yes,
TempleCon, sometimes not. Actually, this year, because
TempleCon has made
moved.
things. Yes. So, side note, TempleCon has moved.
Oh,
Yeah.
It has moved to, was it August now, Craig?
It has moved to something that I can't do. Yeah, it's either August or July.
It's dangerously close to Gen Con now.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say there are cons either in your area, or if you can't make them, come out to Denver, Colorado, and attend Genghis Con and Tacticon, because the games here are amazing. We have fantastic GMs.
Good stuff. So do that, or do some one-offs with your friends. Just try one out. Nothing wrong with that.
That's and you know what? No commitment to like any kind of long campaign that's going to last forever. And I mean, it's role playing can be a blast with just a one-off game.
It can be, especially want to try that other system that you're not sure you can get your friends to commit to for 18 months, but maybe just try it out for one night, and who knows, maybe they'll want to play it again. You get them
like my friend Jake Burgess. He says I could never get you guys to play a campaign of Transformers G1, but I could totally get you to do a one shot of Transformers.
Oh,
G1.
I'd totally play Bumblebee for a night. Come on.
Oh yeah, well, and we did that.
Right, exactly. It's like I think one of the campaigns I played in high school, my brother did. He's like, "We're going to go tonight. We're going to play Looney Tunes." And they were playing a Looney Tunes RPG, and I'm like, I couldn't see that being a long running one, but it was like had this cool
one shot. It's great,
and it had this cool mechanic where you could reach behind your back and pull out just about anything because
nice.
I need a hammer. I'm like, wow,
nice.
So yeah, I still remember that. So get out there and try some one offs. They're good fun, and hopefully we made them sound compelling and exciting and not so scary.
No, they shouldn't be scary at all.
No. Well, Ross, thank you so much for joining us here on The Lost Chapter, and we'll see you on the main show in just one short week.
All right, well, let me just finish my coffee.
Spoiler alert.
Yes. Finish that coffee and that, that we don't know where you got it.
Cruller?
Cruller.
Maybe it's called a cruller.
Okay, crullers.
It could.
Cruller would be correct, which looks nothing like an eclair. Just throwing that out there.
Well, no.
But
my
it's
nomenclature
okay.
with donuts is not.
It's
right.
late, and clearly he is not recovered entirely from Gen Con yet.
Yes. In some parts of the country, they call them donut sticks, so maybe that's what it is.
Donut sticks.
Donut sticks. Or crawlers.
Donut sticks.
Have a munchkin.
That sounds like a question. Donut stick.
All right. See you in a week, Ross. Happy role
See you
playing.
guys in a week. Take
Bye.
care. Bye.
Thanks for purchasing a D6G Lost Chapter. Supporting the show helps it grow.